Hello there. Greetings. Hey. Have you noticed that it takes an act of God to get somebody to do their job now? Nobody wants to work anymore. They call it quiet quitting. I've encountered a lot of that recently. People are actually doing things now that I would have been fired for, like in a heartbeat, back in the day. Yeah? People just, it's like if you don't want to work, then don't come to work. You could just stay at home and play video games in your parents' basement. I'll edit that out of this video. I actually like making videos about subjects that nobody discusses, and I'd like to do that, and I've actually been hounded on discussing rites and rituals and the theurgy relative to the divine. And of course you have to do it in sections, and it's actually divinely simple. But then you have to come up with unique analogies so that people would understand it. Theurgic rites doesn't refer to objective rituals. There are things that get people into a state of mind. It's kind of hard to concentrate, and I've written many books and a lot of articles. It's hard to write articles and books when there's a traffic noise outside, or, the phone keeps beeping, your email keeps beeping. So these things are what is conducive to. But ignorant minds always confuse what is conducive to with conduct. And nobody can actually get their mind out of the idea of objective rites and rituals. And they only think, nearly 100% of humanity can't fathom anything out of what is objective and what is a ritual or a practice. And a practice is basically just a euphemism for a ritual. It's kind of like talking about this apple here. Like people have the mentality, metaphysical mentality of children. You wave this in front of, not that I ever have, in front of some hungry person. They're only thinking in terms of the apple, they can cook it, and, apple fritters, apple pie, just eating the apple, this and that. You're trying to talk about the essence of the apple, i.e. that hollow spot in the center of the apple where there's these little seeds, and the seeds are bifurcated, and the actual sprout, the life, actually springs up between either half of the seed. You keep talking about that, but the only thing somebody sees is the apple. And the objective nature of metaphysics and trying to talk people into understanding, and you have to work your way back. This is the dialectic of transcendence, and it is very, very simple. When someone actually has insight into seeing it, they slap their head, and they go, wow, I don't know why I couldn't have seen it before. And the reason why is everybody is concerned with the objective universe, and I understand that. Just as everybody identifies with the objective body in the mirror, the psychophysical, and the form. So talking about theurgic rites, and by the way, the stuff I recommend reading on this is like Algus Udavini's Philosophy as a Rite of Rebirth, or the writings of Iamblichus and Proclus, specifically the Thomas Taylor translations. I wrote an intro to the collection of the Thomas Taylor series, which is extremely huge, most prolific Greek translator who ever lived. I was privileged to write an introduction to that. It's called The Monad. It's a collection of Thomas Taylor's translations. So humans essentially are trying to keep things simple or lost in the realm of polishing poo. And someone will point me out to that episode, that TV episode where they technically polish a poo, but that of course is taking the analogy too far. There's an old saying that goes that he who serves or attends to the body serves what is his or her, but not what he or she is. When you've crossed the other shore, the boat itself is discarded. You have no need for it. Rituals and rites are things that are meant to be conducive, just as shutting out the noise while you're trying to concentrate on listening something or reading or typing something, especially like a book, an article, block out all the noise of the world. I mean, that is conducive too, but that is not conduct. So there's no branch, by the way, of metaphysics. And this kind of shocks people when I state blatantly obvious things, that teaches an end to physical suffering. Not in any translation whether it be Greek, Indian, or Egyptian, that ever mentions teaching an end to physical. And that's all people are interested in. People are consumed by objectivity. They have no grasp of something that's antecedent. That means prior to. Yeah? Like antecedent to the apple pie is butter and apples and bread and whatever else you need. Sugar to make an apple pie. What is antecedent to? And of course, what's antecedent to that? It's like, well, I planted the seed, waited 50 years for the apples. You know, what is antecedent prior to it? And people just can't grasp objectivity, pure subjectivity, this antecedent to the objective form and phenomena that everybody on this earth is consumed by. We're worried about things we can buy, you know, things that satiate, you know, that fill our wallet up or fill our stomachs up, and people basically live on the axis of what they can take into their body or what their body can make connection with. Those are the kindest words I can actually say. And that's just living in the objective body, and they think that everything is like that. They can't bring their mind out of rituals and practices and this spiritual materialism. Spiritual materialism, of course, would be so-called spiritual objects, icons, iconoclasms, prayers, robes, burning incense, ambulations of the body. And by the way, I was discussing this humorously decades ago with a friend of mine. I think he's since passed away. He's a brilliant metaphysician in his own right. And we humorously said, I can't remember if I came up with it or he came up with it, that if rituals led to any form whatsoever of liberation, then you could hook a dead being up to a robot, which would prostrate the body and or put the hands together in prayer and move it in mudric ways. I don't know if you know what mudras are. They're these special hand movements that some people think are actually spiritual, and thereby gain liberation. I mean, if physical practice were in any way a methodology that led to insight and wisdom, you know, then metaphysics of whether it be Greek, Indian, or otherwise would be completely turned on its head. That's completely antithetical to wisdom. It has no connection whatsoever to either wisdom or liberation. Of course, wisdom is self-proximity. When we talk about wisdom and liberation, we're talking about one and the same thing. Wisdom leads to transcendence, such that you disobjectify the psychophysical. That's the reason why the most repeated phrase in ancient Pali is isakaya na misota. The body is not the soul. We can't say my soul, implying one thing has another. This is my apple. When someone says my soul, they are still locked into this crazy idea of subject-object relationship. My soul. Like, what? What's the one thing that has a soul? So you have the soul, there's the soul. Not that it's ever an object, it's pure subject, of course. But something else has it. A body no more has a soul than, of course, a radio has a signal. And a radio, of course, does not have a signal. Sure it is, a signal in the radio. It's like, you really think that? You think there's a signal in the antenna? No, it's actually a consubstantiality wherein which both are in union. Same thing with body and soul. This is, of course, life. Death is not the opposite of life, it's the end of life, the breakup, disunion between the body and the soul, just as breaking this radio is a disunion from the ability of this radio to tune a signal. Frequency is a little off there. It's 400 megahertz.
The low was 53.
By the way, when the frequency is at a tune, that's no different than someone being sick or someone being on some form of whatever it is they take in. I won't say it. They've consumed whatever this or that. And this is a poor man's way of transcendence. People will bring themselves to the edge of death. Such that they're basically saying, I'm too ignorant to understand what theurgy is, so that I can disunion body and spirit for a temporary period of time and have a true insight and engage in the theurgic synthesis of that which I truly am. In other words, if the signal were sentient, that it would disjoin for a period of time and then have insight. And then, of course, you take that insight and you see where it's at. And then once you can see through the keyhole, you know where the light's coming through the keyhole. Most people can't find the keyhole. They're completely in the dark. They're stumbling around looking for objective phenomena. The barrier is actually twofold. I like to make things really simple in talking about a theurgy, because everybody wanted me to talk about the theurgy of synthesis, which is disobjectification. That's the reason why Greek, Indian, and Egyptian all refer to one and the same thing. It's the same distinction in the eye of Horus, iconography. That would take a long time to go into it. I'd actually like to make a video on that since I've never made one before. Of disobjectifying with the psychophysical, isekai nami. So I thought, this is not myself, that is not myself. Pure subjectivity, because objective negation leads to subjective synthesis. It would be analogous to a sentient signal that would disobjectify from the battery, disobjectify from the antenna, disobjectify from the analog to digital converter, disobjectify with the broadcast, which would be analogous to consciousness, because there's no such thing in any translation, either Pali or Sanskrit, of pure consciousness. In English, unfortunately, this is an extreme issue, because mind, mentation, i.e. thought, and consciousness are really the same thing. And brain, mind, thought, and consciousness are considered one entity and one object, but that's not true in any form of metaphysics. One is not to confuse the consubstantial consciousness, which is no different than the broadcast out of the radio. And the broadcast out of the radio, of course, is consubstantial with the signal, which is not in the radio. It's everywhere and nowhere, and the radio, which processes that signal and, of course, broadcasts it. And people think that's who they are. And then there's another barrier that people create on top of consciousness, and it's imbued with their consciousness, and that is their belief system. I am my beliefs. This, of course, is the reason for 99.99% of the world's strife. This is what I believe, and if you don't believe that, then you're against me, and you're now my enemy, and I don't like you, and this. I mean, I'm not going to talk about it, but this is what's going on in the world. I mean, I kind of humorously say, you know, my God's bigger than your God, or my God's more powerful than your God, and, you know, how dare you? There's a comedian, I met him, it's the only comedian I've ever seen in my life. His name is Emo Phillips, and he tells a story of like two people on a bridge, and they're on the edge of the bridge, and they're like looking over at the sunset, and one guy says, something to the other, it's like, I'm East Baptist Church. The other guy goes, I'm East Baptist Church. Oh, that's fascinating. I'm East Baptist Church, New Referendum 1799 or something. The other guy goes, I'm East Baptist Church, New Referendum 17. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm East Baptist Church, New Referendum 17 whatever, taught by Pastor so-and-so. And the other guy says, oh, I'm the same, taught by the same pastor, except in the next city over. And he said, I'm Baptist, New Referendum, taught by this pastor, and we follow this interpretation of the Bible. And the other guy, who's basically 99.9% of the same as the other guy, he says, why I follow this translation instead of that translation. The first guy goes, heretic! And he pushes the other guy off the bridge. It's so brilliant. It's a perfect, and it's pure comedy. It's kind of comedy Emo Phillips would come up with as far as belief system. So not only are people not their consciousness, which is analogous to the broadcast from the radio, because the broadcast that you actually hear coming out of the speaker,
no precipitation.
This
Sunrise tomorrow.
is not the signal. It's the interpretation of the signal, which is not in the radio, and it is consubstantial to the radio. So people are not that, but they think they're that. And on top of that, they drop an enormous layer of other nonsense, which is their belief system. Everything should be about facts, logic, and wisdom, following natural order and doing what is conducive to their own insight and wisdom. And I do not confuse empirical knowledge, i.e. smarts or intellect or IQ, with gnosis or insight or specifically wisdom. By the way, the ancient Pali word for wisdom is vidya, which is no different than saying light. But nobody sees light, they see illumination. Everybody considers themselves to be the consciousness of illumination, which has a set frequency, and on top of that, there's an upper sideband and a lower sideband of modulation. I don't know if you know what upper sideband or lower sideband is. On a frequency, you can actually modulate in either amplitude modulation or frequency modulation, sideband modulation, and that would be analogous to people's belief system. So not only am I this illumination of a specific frequency, and you're not. because light is not to be confused with its attribute. And this is where you get into the deep aspects of Platonian monism, but that's a matter for another video that I've addressed, and you could really, really, really go deep down the rabbit hole if you want to on that. So not am I the frequency, this would be what an ignorant person would believe, but I'm also to this modulation, sideband modulation of a belief system, and none of that stuff is true. So this is the reason why people, and I'm not talking about physical suffering, because there's no end. Anybody that's born must necessitatively, suffer and perish, just as any other living organism. Necessitatively, there's that word, by the way, that the Greeks called ananke. It doesn't mean necessity. What it actually means is it can't exist any other way. All of this garbage is built up upon somebody. So we have these two aspects of a barrier. People cannot grasp, and I tell them this, and it's not confounding, it's not meant to be, hyper mystical. This idea of mystical and occult is just actually religious trash that's thrown upon true metaphysics. The only reason why anything is hidden or secret is because it's beyond the understanding of the simplex, objective minds of human beings. They cannot get their head out of the barrier of objectivity, because that's all they know. They can't smell it, taste it, or eat it, or interact with it, or feel it, or care about it. Then, I don't think it exists. And metaphysics and wisdom can never be about that. So the barriers that people have is twofold. It cannot be done by actions. No action would either lead to wisdom or to insight, because action is a ritual. It is a practice. The Greek word for this is melite. By the way, this is where we get the reason why I don't ever use the word meditation. That is where the word meditation comes from, by the way. Melite became meditatio in Latin. And from meditatio, we get the English word meditation. It doesn't mean anything. The word literally means a practice or a ritual, and everybody's got their own definition of it, and it is completely unconnected to wisdom and insight. It makes people feel good, it de-stresses them, and people think that's the goal. And it's not. There's a million ways you can be de-stressed. They do it all the time in hospitals after operations. They stick you on a drip, and man, you're a boneless piece of jello. You could watch the Cartoon Network and drool on yourself. You'll be the happiest, most laid-back person on earth. And people think that's a goal, and it's not. That's neither wisdom nor transcendence. You can't get there through any action. No action, meaning physical action, or even mental action, could actually lead to that. And obviously the inverse is also too the case. Inaction doesn't lead to anything. This apple isn't going to do anything other than rot. But a human being just like this apple can sit there blank-minded in catapraxis and think they're achieving something that will calm them down. But that's neither wisdom nor insight. I've met some of these people that will actually engage in catapraxis or sit in zazen, and they're actually not doing Zen, because Zen comes from the word jhana, which comes from the Sanskrit word dhyana, which comes from the Pali word jhana, which means to burn. You're burning away objectivity. And this is the apophatism of via negativa. And they're not doing anything. They are calming themselves down. So you can't get there through action. You certainly can't get there through inaction. You have to, and you can only get there through theurgic disobjectification. These objective phenomena, either of doing or not doing anything, are lateral motions. They're phenomenal. Even non-motion is completely lateral and completely objective. There's not subjective. It doesn't lead to transcendence. And the other barrier that people will engage in, talking about actions versus inactions, people will engage in thought. They'll actually try to escape a thinking box by trying to think their way out of a thinking box. And of course you can't get there. You can't get there through blanking your mind out. You can't get there through a thought, because all you're doing is just churning up the waters. These are all objective and lateral movements. They're perpetually actually trying to do something with the objective radio or the apple. And I'm actually talking about is the hollow inside this apple containing the seeds. And the seed itself is split in two, and life actually, the sprout comes from that hollow of the two halves of the seed. And I'm not talking about the signal. You can't turn the knobs on this radio or hit anything here and change the pitch or the tune or the gain or the treble or the bass on this radio that would have any effect on the signal. Everything, every knob on this radio, no different than what people do, which is rituals and practices, i.e. the word melite. Yeah? They're not engaging in disubjectification. What people are supposed to be doing, and most people have never heard about it, is the other Greek word. The other Greek muse is called mneme. It means recollection, but not conventional recollection. It means Platonic recollection. Look up Platonic recollection. You'll get 1,000 articles about Platonic recollection. I can go into great detail about this. You require like a dozen videos. I can go further down that rabbit hole if you like, but just read an article or two about Platonic recollection. There's got to be at least 1,000 of them out there. So no turning of the knobs or anything on this radio is going to affect the signal, is it? But that is the trap that people have. They have the barrier of action versus inaction. The other barrier of thinking, well, I can think my way out of a thinking box. Like, no, you can't. You're just churning up the waters more. Or what about non-thought? You know, I feel really calm and peaceful when I actually blank my mind out, engage in catapraxis. Like, well, you do. But you can get the same thing from the hospital when they, you know, put an IV line into your arm after like a major operation. Man, you're so laid back and cool. Or at the dentist's office. You know what I'm talking about. That has nothing to do with wisdom or insight or subjective synthesis, i.e. theurgy. And true theurgy is just disubjectification. Disubjectification is synthesis. Wisdom is self-proximity. This stuff is neither illogical, it's not hard at all, it is not occultic or secret or dark or hidden. It is only secret and hidden and presumably dark is because 100% of humanity, essentially so, can't get their brains out of the objective. They have brain lock. Everybody really does suffer brain lock, and they can't wrap their mind around theurgy. You read about this from Proclus or Iamblichus or some really great books. Like my author, she's a friend of mine. She loves me and I love her. She's the only living author I respect. Her name is Deirdre Caribbean. She wrote a great book called The Unknown God. You can find it on Amazon. This disubjectification methodology, i.e. synthesis, where you no longer identify with the forms and phenomena. You don't identify with, and it is not that which you are, your belief systems or this existential consciousness. No amount of pressing of the dials or tuning the bass or the treble or the pitch or the left speaker or the right channel or the left channel. Nothing I do with this radio, even if it's much more complicated ones like the really, really professional radios. There's a million little knobs you could actually change the audio output. None of that has to do anything with what's on the record or what is actually in the ether that you're actually tuning into at a specific frequency. The true analogy of genuine theurgy is not this radio, nothing to do with this radio, no turning of the knobs one way or the other, any presets on this, but demodulation of the signal itself. Because right now I'm tuning to
Frequency mode. Chance of shower.
162.400 megahertz. So that's the cyclic rate of this perturbation that this radio is able to tune. True theurgy would be that you are that sentient signal which is ab extra to the radio, and you are demodulating it. And demodulating it is removal of the burning of the spirit, no different than the burning of these logs, because this fire, not that this is a real fire, you perpetually have to keep logs heaped onto it to keep the fire going. You perpetually have to release energy, which is both suffering and embodiment, that perpetuates embodiment. What would subjective synthesis and transcendence be if not demodulation? What would energy be without a transverse frequency? Because no signal itself could ever be tuned if it didn't have a cyclic component, i.e. agitation. Isn't a frequency or wavelength an agitation of energy? Isn't that an energy circuit? Well, that particular energy circuit of agitation is 162.400 megahertz. Analogously, this is absolutely perfect with talking about the transcendence or theurgy, the apophatism. It goes by many different names. Neti neti, via negativa, apophatism, theurgy, mneme, i.e. Platonic recollection. All of these are different Greek and Indian and Pali and Sanskrit terms for one and the same thing. Demodulation, disubjectification. It is hyper-rational. It's hyperlogical, it's hyper-simplex, but people can't get their brain out of this brain lock of objectivity. They have one or two barriers. They think you can either get there by doing something or not doing something. You can get there by trying to think your way out of a thinking box or blanking your mind out. And all of these are barriers, and they're not conducive to insight, wisdom, transcendence, demodulation, and disobjectification, which is the ultimate commanded goal of all monistic metaphysics, both Greek, Indian, and Egyptian. And that's not my opinion, or my feeling, or belief. It's a hardcore fact. Concentric versus decentric. Yeah? You can't think your way out of a thinking box. There's nothing turning the dials on this radio or modulating anything in here that has anything to do with changing the quality of the signal. This is undeniable. I'm going to press some buttons over here, I'm going to do this here, and I'm going to do that over here on the radio. You haven't affected anything other than the output of the speaker, analogous to consciousness, and your beliefs. So you're going to change your belief systems. You're going to change what you think about. You're going to stop thinking altogether. That doesn't change anything about the signal. Tattvamasi, that thou art. You are analogously, don't take the analogy too far, the signal. You're not the broadcast, you're not the antenna, you're not the processing of that, you're not the belief systems. You can't get there from here. People don't understand that. Subjective rituals versus objective rituals versus subjective gnosis. Look up Platonic recollection, look up Mneme, look up, there's countless articles on apophatism. Purchase or download my friend's free book, The Unknown God. I also too have a link below on the original definition of so-called meditation versus Mneme, Platonic recollection, and what true theurgy actually is. This stuff is hyper simple, hyper rational, and hyper logical, but people in no point in time of their life have ever geared their brain to think that way. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to contact me, just click the link below, and I'll respond to your email, and I read every comment. Okay? Thank you.